Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for attending today's session. You've joined the Leadership and Management webinar series, and today's topic is Leading Change Insightfully with Elise Coit, who's the Managing Principal Consultant at Elise Coit and Associates. Again, thank you for coming. I think you'll find this topic incredibly timely, and today's presentation is going to be a real treat for you, and I hope and know that you'll gain a lot from today's presentation. Before we get started, I just wanted to review the agenda and a few housekeeping items. So first and foremost, welcome, like I said, and I want to let you know this session is being recorded. Then we're going to talk about a little bit about UC San Diego Extension and the Corporate Education and Custom Training Department specifically. This department hosts this webinar series. Then we're going to get into the presentation, which is why you're all here today. And then we will save the question and answer period to the end, and we'll be using the chat box. So please utilize that chat box to provide any comments or questions when the time comes. And if there are any comments throughout the session, I will be monitoring the chat feature. Also, there will be a couple polls during the session, so we encourage you to participate to enhance today's presentation. Okay, so a little bit about UC San Diego Extension. We are the continuing education arm of the university. We service people from all stages of life, from kindergarten all the way through retirement. So we have K-16 programming, we have our professional development and personal enrichment programs, public programs that we provide to adult professionals. Those programs really focus in on current cutting edge skills and help develop your career and personal growth. We actually have 100 different certificate programs and 4,500 courses that we provide in various formats, from on grounds to online. Of course, on grounds is on hold for now, but it will all be coming back soon. These particular programs are taught by experts in the field, including people like Elise Coit. We also have faculty from UC San Diego who teach our programs as well. They really do provide timely insight and knowledge into these various topics that could include business, technology, science, education, and so forth. All of our courses are practical in nature, as we want you to learn today and apply tomorrow. A little bit about our corporate education and custom training department. I think I failed to introduce myself, so I am Shannon McDonald. I am the Associate Director for Corporate Education and Custom Training. I have a wonderful team here who works with me to provide solutions for organizations around the nation and in fact around the globe. And the way we do that is we work with organizations from within. We have a diverse group of programming options available, as you just heard about, and we also can build things from the ground up. And we develop curriculum that meets your organization's needs in a convenient and flexible format. We help you identify skills gaps and create a training plan. And then we work with your teams to hone in on that curriculum and make sure it fits your organization's needs, and then we deliver it in the format that makes most sense for you. So that's a little bit about our department. As for the leadership programs we offer, which goes hand in hand with this webinar series, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction on what we offer. First, our Leadership and Management Essentials program, which is actually what this webinar series is a part of, is a series of offerings that help professionals develop leadership and business acumen across all industries. And we do that by providing webinar series, as I just mentioned, in addition to half-day workshops on topics such as communication, conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, stress, unconscious bias, just to name a few. So we're constantly adding topics to this lineup, and we will be doing that with the webinar series as well. Next is our Leadership and Teamwork Certificate, which is a wonderful program that's online, and it's really designed for the emerging leader. In this program, we focus on leadership, teamwork, and project management. Students in this course work collaboratively on teams and apply skills towards a project. And they really enhance their communication skills, self-awareness, and time management, and many more, so that they can be so they can excel in today's workplace. The next two programs here are part of our executive leadership programming. The Leadership and Management Program, LAMP, is a 5-month program designed for entry to mid-level professionals. It helps managers and leaders to help them develop a comprehensive management skill set. Students in this program learn core skills in individual and work group leadership, business management fundamentals, and personal skill building, among many, many, many other things. Then we have our Executive Perspective for Scientists and Engineers program, which we call EPSI. This is a 9-month executive leadership program designed for mid to senior level professionals. And it's really focusing on the challenges that are facing today's organizations. Participants gain the ability to build cross-functional relationships, think strategically, communicate more effectively, and they also develop and implement a business plan. So it's very comprehensive and for the more senior leadership, for the more senior leader. So that's a little bit about those programs. The last two programs are accepting applications now, and you can find out more by visiting extension.ucsd.edu/custom programs. And finally, I just want to let you know about the webinar series, which this particular topic is a part of. Today is Leading Change Insightfully, but we have a variety of other topics coming up, including conflict, leadership disruptive, emotional intelligence, and stress. Those are all coming up in the next over the next few weeks. We will be adding more to this lineup, so I encourage you to continue to visit our website, which is extension.ucsd.edu/levelup, to see the latest lineup of offerings. Please note too that past webinars, while you will also receive those in your email, a link to the presentation, in addition to any other resources that might accompany presentation or these webinars, we also will be posting the webinars, the webinar recordings at this website as well, just in case you missed that email. Okay, now on with the show. I'm going to turn this over to Elise, and here is Leading Change Insightfully. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Well, good to meet you. Shannon, if you do get your connection back, I'd love to hear where people are from. I see a lot of people from San Diego, but not necessarily. I also just want to acknowledge before we start talking about change that obviously we're talking about it in quite a context. And I do apologize in advance that despite the big themes of the day, I'm just not going to be able to cover everything that's around us. And I just want to acknowledge that there is a lot going on for all of us. I hope this is useful for you today. And I'm going to mainly focus on business topics, even though I know there are so many other pressing, personal and social changes afoot. So forgive me for this focus, but we all are still, many of us, trying to do our jobs and doing them as well as we can. So that is what I'm interested in, that if you're leading change and helping people through change, that you be well equipped to do that. So let me just introduce myself a little bit. Shannon had a chance to tell you a little bit about the corporate education programs. I work doing custom corporate education. I come from a project management background, but I got interested in the human side very early on and have ended up specializing in the integration of change management and project management. So I do work with our corporate custom programs in business, helping businesses often implement project management disciplines and project management akin disciplines, and deliver the changes that requires into the business. Occasionally also teach at Extension, and I'm teaching a project management bootcamp coming up in a couple of weeks in June. That's online if you want to find out more about that. But I'm excited to meet you guys. I'd like to know a little bit, hopefully Shannon is still on and can tell me who you are. Would you raise your hand on the on camera if you're on, and just let us know, are you in leadership and management? Who here is in a leadership role? There's a thumbs up going and some hands. Yeah, thank you. And how about those that are leading change initiatives or feel like you're in charge of people that you have to lead through change or model changes for? Yeah, we have a few. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, it's good to meet you. So here's what I have planned for us today. I am thinking that we'll just start with a brief kind of understanding and get you thinking about the nature of change. Then let's look and think about your change challenge. I think this needs to be relevant as possible to you. And to that end, I've also prepared some resources with you for you that you'll be able to take away today. And then at the end, I want to talk about that human side, you know, how we model change, lead change. And I want to leave you with 5 ways that I've found very, very helpful when leading change. And I hope they'll be of real use to you. So I'm going to start us out with a question, and that is on the nature of change itself. Think about for yourself, has change changed? And we'll do a poll in just a second because I want to ask you, in your opinion, what's different about change today? I've got this picture from the 50s. That was like the appliance revolution. And now we can move from iPhone 10 to iPhone 11 in like 10 times less than the time it took that change, which we called a revolution at the time, to happen. So if you could give me your opinion in the poll. How is change today different? Yeah, it's fast, it's constant. No wonder we're all so tired, right? There's just dealing with a lot. It's chaotic and unpredictable. Yeah, thank you. Fewer of you are dealing with repeated change, so I understand that. It does feel like it's almost constant. All right, so thank you for that poll, and I will move us forward to talk about Lewin's model for change. So what I was saying is that depending how we think about change is how we deal with change. So this is how Lewin looked at change. You would first unfreeze your current situation, you'd make the change, and then you'd refreeze to a new state. And when you guys responded to that poll and said change is constant and you know, unpredictable, you can see how, although we use this model still today to manage change, it's difficult. So I'm going to give you another model, because the idea of unfreezing change, well, that got done for us with COVID. Managing that change and planning it all ahead of time and then getting everyone on board and then refreezing in the new state, it's just not relevant today. We're doing something a little more like this, or what I call the 4 R's. We first react to change, then we respond to change, and then we try to regroup, and then we'll reinforce that new place where we are, all the while often still reacting and responding to other changes that are happening at the same time. And COVID is a great example of that. If you think about what's happening with the COVID, first we all reacted. Response was very varied. That may be true in your businesses as well. You may have business units that get hit first, others that respond later. Then regrouping comes. That can also come in phases and waves. And one group in your business or one team could already have set their change and be working to get people to work in that new way, while others are still reacting. So I wanted to provide you a model that was a little bit more dynamic as you think about change. And let me illustrate this model with my favorite restaurant. So I'm really sorry, it's almost lunch and we're going to talk about food. So this is going to be bad. I can tell you this right now. This is a place in Pacific Beach in San Diego. It's a little neighborhood restaurant. This is a very small restaurant. So if you think of COVID, look how tight those tables are. So they got hit, as every restaurant did, with stay-at-home orders and shut down. They were, in their business model, already producing takeaways. So they were ready to, if you like, in terms of our 4R model, they were kind of ready to respond with takeaway. But that took a while. So here's their timeline, and this is a real case. March 19th, they closed down. And this is what, if you walked into the restaurant, it looked like. It was like boxes of takeaway pizzas in the restaurant. Of course, you could go in, but then on March 15, they pivoted within 6 days and put this notice out to their customers. We're now offering Italian groceries online for order and pickup in the restaurant. So literally you go in to the front door, you could see the pizza boxes in the back, and you could pick up groceries. So pizza dough, cheese, meat. And then within about 30 days, they were offering different things. Lunch kits you could pick up, drinks kits, and then they launched an online website for groceries. So now we're in a whole new business model. So if you think of Respond, now we're probably in reshape, and that's a very short amount of time. So you guys are really right that time is such a compressed factor in change right now. That's a pretty quick pivot for a restaurant. And I'm sure some made that pivot and others struggled. So they've opened theirs and they've made their announcement they'll reopen. But I asked them about the big Del Mar opening of their third restaurant, which was supposed to be June 12th and now is being put off until the fall. So you can think about, when you think about where they are reshaping and kind of reinforcing that new shape. And now they're planning for their next response, which is how to do the new restaurant. So that really, really is a circular stage that we keep going through. So having that in mind and kind of thinking about how dynamic this is, let's go to the next part of my talk, which is kind of sizing up your change. How do you do that? And then how do you lead that change, as effectively as possible? We're going to have to do a little sizing up of your change challenge kind of intuitively, but I want you to have to think about change as being insightful both from a data point of view, but also from a personal point of view. So let's talk a little bit about data first. So when you have a change challenge, what do you need to look at? I want you to think about for a moment, what is your challenge? Just think about something you can use as an organizing challenge as we talk about the next, kind of how you size up and measure change. So have something in your mind, and so you can apply these ideas as in real time as we go along. So often we'll think of change as how big it is, right? But I want you to start thinking about the size of your change challenge in terms of impact. And impact isn't just whether it's hitting 1 or 5 or 10 employees in a pizza place, or whether it's hitting a lot of people. The size of a challenge isn't how big, it's how much impact. So what I want to talk to you about is, how do you measure impact? How do you measure change impact? And I'm going to give you a formula for measuring impact. It's a simple formula, and then we'll talk about this a little bit more. So you want to do area of change times depth times time frame. That is your actual change challenge. So here's how you do that. In a business context, this is really, so area, you can think about number of systems, number of people, how many business units, what structures they're under. Think about your business model. Ambrosia is a good example, the pizza place, of how they changed their business models, but many of their processes stayed the same. So their takeout and cooking processes stayed the same, but their service, their customer services processes really changed, and then a new business model came in. And you can think about those same elements in terms of depth. Does it fundamentally change how people work, operate, and behave? Are you asking people to adopt an entire new culture? Is that a minor thing? And then time frame, is that a temporary thing? Or is this a long-term thing? Will our Milano pizza experience and grocery store both continue to exist over the long term? Or will we leave aside the temporary things we've used to adapt or reshape the change and drop them and go back to our original business models? So here's a question for you, and we're going to put a poll up. I'm hoping we've still got Shannon. I'm going to ask you, in terms of area, depth, and time frame, where are you focused? Are you focused on how big your change is? Are you focused mainly how deep it is, how much time you've got? Or are you somewhere in between there? And just think about that challenge I asked you to have in mind and let us know where you are. Yeah, some of you are in that more mature place where you're really dealing with all the elements. You're not just thinking about the initial response. You've got a mixed element. So it's complex, isn't it? And I'm happy to be able to give you, as we leave today, and we'll send this out afterwards, Shannon will send you all an email, two wonderful spreadsheets that you can use to begin to document who are the groups that are affected, what are the areas you're going to take into account. And those spreadsheets will really help you by producing, in the end, some visuals that you can present to your management teams as you lead change. So I'll come back to those in just a moment, but I hope those tools are going to be very practical for you. All right, so thank you for participating in the poll. And thank you for giving me that kind of intuitive read on where you stand on area and depth and time and your own change challenge. I hope that gives you a perspective on your change challenge that's useful. So let's move from how you would survey projects from a data point of view to the more insight-based approach, which is how you participate in this change as a leader, because you are pretty key. And there's something I really want to share with you that I've learned over time managing change and managing very large technology, global size technology projects, and leading other people through change, from job changes to downsizing to new process adoption. And that is that people are not as inflexible as you think. Every human being has the ability to have a new thought at any time, to have an insight. And if you think about it, even external circumstances, whether it's a process change or whether it's a cultural change, really don't impact an individual's ability to think about that change in their own way. So our innate human ability to have an insight remains intact throughout the change process. And I want to encourage you in two ways. Think about insight in terms of your people and the fact that they can see things differently, and then model that in yourself by working from that basis. So let's talk about how do you work from seeing your own and using your own insight and your own insightful process. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to give this a little bit of a practical first go. If I close the poll, I hope that's not going to create a problem because it's in front of my deck. But let's talk about it this way. CHAPS as an acronym for 5 things to think about as you lead people through change. The importance of these are obvious, but I think it's really worth talking about them a little bit because amazingly enough in change endeavors, they don't happen often enough. Clarity, this is about communicating to people where you actually are and where you want to be and being pretty straightforward about that. People can't, I know we're all saturated with a lot of information, but it's helpful. And if you think about how helpful it is through COVID, as we've got clearer and clearer about what distance means, how infection happens in open spaces versus closed spaces, transmission of, through the air and what all that means, the clearer we get, the more, even if it's difficult information, the more comfortable people tend to feel. So as a leader, you do have to manage what that looks like, but think for yourself how clarity improves people's attitude and receptivity to change. And you can model that by being clear in your communications, thinking about what outcomes you really want to see at the end of your change process, modeling those and then communicating those. So that really means thinking about the behaviors you want to see, the changes you want to see, the processes, what they'll look like at the end, and visualizing that end state, and then being able to envision and provide that clear view to others as much as you can, or being clear about the fact that you don't see it. I've seen a few messages now from CEOs that are like, we're figuring it out. And that's also helpful, as long as that's not the only message for a long time. So that takes us to honesty, which is also obvious. I mean, if you have a change and you're changing the way people work, or you're changing the way customers can interact with people. Like, for example, moving to home has meant that companies like AT&T, who are servicing people's phones and devices, can no longer see customer information because they are working from home. And they made a decision not to provide customer information to people who are working from home and talking on the phone. So all the processes for customer service and being able to call and deal with your account have changed. Other companies are doing the same and being clear about how processes are changing, reporting on how they're changing, and being pretty honest about that. So I do encourage you to be honest about where you are and be careful about that credibility gap that can develop if you are over communicating or not communicating in the right ways, in ways that are grounded. So this comes back to really what I want to talk about at the end, which is being grounded in yourself when you make communications, so that you can really connect with people on a level where they can hear you, and that they can hear you from a less busy-minded place. All right, here's something people really forget about with change, and that is agreement. We push a lot of change out. We have a lot of all hands, and it's going to be like this now, and we don't get any sense of how people are feeling in the room, and then I've seen leaders walk out of the room and say, well, I told them, so it's done. I encourage you to set up processes whereby people's managers and supervisors are making sure that people actually agree. It's not enough to just say we're doing it this way. You want to check at least that people agree and test the water on how that is looking for folks. And that's more than just pushing messages out, as you all well know. I also want to say something about change and how to focus on change, because what I said about an all hands and kind of the big information pushes that we do, we kind of assume that changing a process or changing a system and enterprise change is all we need to push out. But in fact, enterprise change is ultimately always individual change. I once had a company tell me, we don't want you to focus on the individual change, just deal with the big picture. Well, you can't. You must be ready to get down with everyone in some way or another. It may not be you as the leader, but make sure that your layers of management and supervisors are in touch with what it's going to take individually for people to change. And that can be a hefty, a pretty hefty lift for some people. So pay attention to those areas where you're expecting deep behavioral change because of a process, where you're expecting handovers from one group to another or one person to another to change, or departments that will now deal with each other differently, and tend to those through your change management process. Then finally, back to insight. All right, so as you lead change, we talk about personal presence and honesty and clarity and things like that, but all of this is only possible when you yourself are settled. And that is a very useful thing to bear in mind as you go. And here's what I want to suggest to you as a leader. Just take a moment to think about a time when you've been in a peaceful state of mind, especially if you're running right now. If you're not just physically running and work is running and your inbox is running, but your mind is running too. And when we communicate from that place, if you've ever tried to have a sensitive discussion with someone while they looked at their email or looked at their phone or did this to you while they were talking to you, it's so disconnecting. And your change efforts will be impacted by that level of presence that you bring to the change effort. So as you think about that, a time when you have felt peaceful and settled, I want you to notice something about it. So bring something to mind now. Some time when you feel peaceful. And I want you to notice that even if you can't now, this might be a good thing to do during the week. Notice that that state of mind is internal. It isn't actually created by the events that you have around you. So I'll give you an example of a lot of people who tell me that they get very calmed down and peaceful when they're like at the gym. But I know many people who do not, who go to the gym and whose minds run just as quickly. So there's nothing about the nature of exercise or running or an activity or even a change situation that means that forcibly everyone will think about it in the same way. We're all sovereign. We will think about things differently. And peaceful states are also not connected to external circumstances. They're generated from within. So if you can get in touch with what a peaceful state feels like, you will be in touch with what an insightful state feels like. That's not to say that insight isn't flowing through you all the time. It is. I mean, I've been in a terrible argument with someone and had an insight that this was not an intelligent thing to do, and that I needed to step back and take a moment. And I've had arguments or moments that have been tricky when I did not hear that. But don't think that some particular state of mind is required. I just want you to get in touch with what insightfulness feels like so that you can use that in your communications and to connect with people, and to have your come from be a recognizable state for you. I think it's perfectly possible to know, I am too stressed feeling right now. I am too tense right now. I am too busy minded right now to be effective in my communication or in my connection with this person. And maybe you will be able to step back, and maybe you won't. But it is something you have the power to recognize. And it is something you have the power to use in your life and in your work as a leader to be connected to people in a more effective way and get your messages across. I think this is one of the big hidden secrets. We talk about communication and messaging, and we never mention that the state you're in when you do it has a lot to do with how it's received. And so manage that a little bit. Start taking notes, start taking inventory, and tune in to yourself and how you are when you are delivering. And then don't be surprised if you are very busy-minded and try to deliver a deep message about a sensitive matter, and it doesn't happen. You can take even today, as we dealt with the technology at the beginning of this webinar, and I could feel at a moment a kind of peak of anxiety surging. And I think that's normal for all human beings. We surge and we relax. What happens to a lot of us is we're in constant surge. So pay attention to the fact that you aren't really, you are also moving in and out of that. You'll have many moments during the day when you are leaning back, when you are relaxed, and you can encourage that and promote that within yourself, and try to help yourself, your team, and your business by being in those more centered and insightful states when you're communicating and thinking about change, and when you're assessing change to the extent that you can. So here's the last distinction on that. I think that it's possible to tell the difference between a fear-based state of mind or busyness, a busy-minded state of mind, and a peaceful state of mind. And that's the only distinction that you need to be able to navigate your way through when it's good for you to be in action. Now, sometimes you have to be in action when you're not in a great state, but you can acknowledge that. And that's part of what clarity and honesty can be, especially in one-to-ones. Like, I'm not in a great place right now, but we need to have this conversation. So if this doesn't happen as well as I'd like, I take that on. That right now I have a lot on my mind. And that's a lot more connecting for a person than having them come into your office to talk to you and you're on all your devices and multitasking while telling them that their job role is changing. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, it's a terrible experience. So, be the one who offers something different, something more connected. I think we all can. And what you'll find is that as you do that, it brings it out in others. It's quite an amazing thing. There was a wonderful book written by Nancy Klein called Time to Think. And she did many, many experiments in business with teams sitting together and someone just listening while the other person talked. And the effect of that was very interesting. The effect was both people got smarter. And I thought that was amazing. That when we give each other that level of grounded attention, that's something that you can manage in yourself and something that you'll find insightful thinking flowing through, both of you in a one-to-one will benefit, but also your teams and everyone else will benefit, because everyone has this capacity. And so it calls to the capacity in others when you are looking there for yourself. So I hope that's been helpful for you. Maybe there is an action you'd like to take or something you'd like to do differently as you leave today. And don't go away, because we're about to talk about the tools that I brought to send to you afterwards. And also I want to leave some time for questions. But if you have a minute, you know, maybe think of an action you can take. And Shannon, if you like, I think it's optional, but Shannon, if you'd like to share an action you're going to take or something you'd like to change going forward about how you're leading change, we'd love to see it in the chat. I don't think we have a chance to respond to it, and we want to move to questions, but many others may benefit from your insight even now during this webinar. So I encourage you to go ahead if you want to, optional of course, to share in the chat with where you might like to go next and something you might like to take on in the next week or two, even if it's just noticing your states of mind. All right, well, I want to thank you very much and just quickly talk to you about 3 tools that I have for you and that we'll send to you afterwards. Here's one. This is a free checklist, and there are many, many resources on change on the ProSci website, P-R-O-S-C-I, ProSci.com. The resource page has many downloads, and I really encourage you to download the checklist, but you won't have to because we have it for you and we will send it to you. Still, I wanted you to have that link in that resource because ProSci are very, really excellent when it comes to leading change, and especially on the point that I made about how individual change is the basis for organizational change. And that you'll really find resources there to help you out if you feel ill-equipped to deal with individual behavioral change as part of your change initiative. They are super, super helpful, and you can always reach out to them, or you can reach out to me, of course. Here on the more data insight part, I want to give you a impact assessment, some impact assessment tools, back to that idea of looking at area, depth, and time. These are 2 spreadsheets. One, you take and assess a particular project, and then you can take that assessment of depth, area, and time and plug it into a larger assessment with multiple projects, and it will kick out some very nice images for you and visuals for you that you can use if you need to speak to management about change initiatives and how you're working to assess change and deal with change. And I want to acknowledge the brilliant people who created those 2 spreadsheets and were kind enough to provide them to me and everyone on LinkedIn, actually. And that was Ibby Thompson at Isoria Change. So they're also doing good work. They do a lot of work with change management offices. So if you are in a situation where you're leading a change management office, connect with them. They are fantastic. Otherwise, I'm happy to connect with you. Please do on LinkedIn. My email is also there if you want to reach out to me personally or message me. I'd love to hear from you. And then I also hope I've left enough time for questions now. All right, thanks for putting up with the beginning when we had a few hiccups. I really appreciate that. And I'm really enjoying being with you, and I can't wait to hear what your questions are. Shannon, can you come back on audio? Do we still have you? Yes, I hope so. I see you. Do you want to take the screen back, or shall I just leave it as is? Hi, thank you. I see the chat now, and I can see some of you who are still here. What I don't see is Shannon. So does anyone have a question they want to put in chat? I will be able to see it. Yeah, thank you for the comments about how difficult it is to remain mindful. I think a lot of people come to me with that question about how to stay mindful. Thomas, the name of the book and the author I referenced was Nancy Kline, K-L-I-N-E, Nancy, and the book was Time to Think. Time to Think. And I see some other questions. Shannon, have we got your...
I'm back.
He's got you. Gosh, you poor thing. You've had so much in and out today.
Yeah, I really apologize for that.
That's all right. I hope
territory sometimes, right?
It does. I see a question from how do you help your teams understand change doesn't mean panic? Okay, I think that's a great question. It's good to distinguish between an event and the emotional and internal response to an event. So one thing you can point out to your team, and be sensitive about this, because you don't want to give your team the impression that you think that all their stress is just in their head. Like, be very, very sensitive to that, because people are suffering right now, and we don't want as leaders to say, that's all in your head. What I want you to see is there's not a causal connection between an event and the way you think about it. A good example of this is any time the police are called onto a crime scene of any kind or an accident, and you talk to the witnesses to that scene, every single one has a different view. Everyone has a different perspective. Those perspectives are formed in thought. They are formed in our own perception. So there is a role of our own thinking when it comes to how we stress. Otherwise, we would all be stressed in exactly the same way at all the same events. And if you look around, it's not true. I mean, it may seem like collectively we're all in complete upheaval and stress, and that's certainly feels like that, but it's actually a mountain valley. We all go up and down. We stress at times, we come down, we go in and out, and that's a function of thought. So as you work with your teams, help them to recognize that events are not causal for their internal world, and that they should do whatever they can to take care of themselves, and try to remember that the variety of responses are possible, and that they always have the ability to have an insight within themselves. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but they can support them in that, support them in whatever they need to do to see something for themselves. I hope that's helpful.
Here's another question, Elise. Somebody said, thank you, this is so helpful. I was wondering regarding CHAPS, how do you suggest leaders to react/pivot when they do not have an agreement?
Right. Well, first of all, it's good to know, isn't it? Because I've seen many people proceed without checking that. So you have to have a little bit of courage when you find out that people don't agree, because it's telling you that you've moved on too fast or not messaged in the right way. You'll have to regroup probably and decide. You may meet with your supervisors to decide, okay, how do we need to remessage or pull back? And then eventually perhaps diagnose what happened there and just do better next time. But I mean, it's one of the biggest causes of people not participating. They just never agreed. It's amazing. We think we hire people and they sign an employment agreement, therefore they've agreed to everything, but people don't see it that way. They don't. They like to say, okay, I will have my report in on Friday. So at a one-to-one level, obviously you can just check an agreement orally. So tell me what you've heard. That's a little coaching technique. Tell me what you've heard about what I just said, or let's get our agreement in writing, or could you email me now and tell me what you think we've just agreed, or tell me now what you think we've just agreed. So check it. Check what they have agreed, and boy, you'll get different versions. And it's tough, this is a tough business being a leader, and especially leading change, and leading change in crisis is the hardest, because people's listening is down. It's way down, like our listening is down like this. So you have to open up that listening space by being the one who models that and being able to sit back. Like, you can't be rushing through your day like an insane person and then expect people to listen, because they're doing the same.
Great. Here's another one. How can you convince the senior leadership with move fast and embrace change, their values, that sometimes having 100 different initiatives and changes as a measure of success will disrupt the business without being penalized for speaking up?
You may, if that's the culture, honestly, you may be penalized for saying I don't agree, because essentially you're saying I don't agree with this culture in a way. I mean, sorry to be blunt about it. That's not what I would say, but I'm just pointing that out. So businesses have cultures, and move fast and break things is a culture. And people come in, and when they're in the wrong culture, they leave. And people who like move fast and break things will be okay, will thrive. If you're not seeing the value of that, then that might be a conversation you can open. You can say, well, where let's analyze the business value of this. Like, what's the value we've seen on these initiatives? If we expected X, but first of all, did we define what we expected? Then did we measure that we got what we expected? So that has to do with how you defined it. Did you find it well? Did you define it well enough to actually measure it? Or you just said, we'll get it done. A lot of times a technical implementation goal will be get it done. But the business reason for that goal is what you need to measure. If you get Salesforce in, but your Salesforce system doesn't provide you management data on the number of sales so that you can pay commissions, you're in trouble. Your system hasn't met its goal. So be clear about your goals. I would start with the goals. See if you're setting business goals, see if you're measuring the business goals, and then try to have a value conversation, which is, I think we're getting halfway to our goal. And because we're doing so much, our value is getting limited by the number of initiatives, and our bandwidth is this. And stay factual. This is where I think really being centered and not, manage and be aware of being plugged in yourself to any emotional response to how this is not okay, I'm not good with this. Try to find that piece in yourself and look at it as a business thing. Go in with neutrality and analysis if you can, and enlist someone maybe on that leadership team who supports that view and get them to tag team with you a little bit. Those are my thoughts. Anybody else want to contribute on that? Feel free.
Another question is, how do you stay positive and high energy as a leader?
Wow, I don't know what your answer will be, but my answer often is, my energy comes from how I stay aware of my ability to generate new thinking. Like, I'm very, very aware that I have this resiliency in me to move, to pivot, to respond. Like, humans are incredibly resilient, much more than we give them credit for. So I really kind of sit in that place. I try to see, like, we could have a new idea at any time. We could. Like, what is the circumstance? Tell me a circumstance where I could stop you from having a new idea. What would that be? Like, what could I do to you? Even if I gag you, I can't stop you from having a new idea. So there is this something in us. And I think for me, I stay positive by thinking, okay, we don't see it now, but we could. We could, because nothing about this situation can impede that function of insight. So I tend to abstract or go meta to, this is the function, I have this function, I have this ability. And right now I'm a mess, but I'm not feeling positive. And I don't try to find positive things. I try to let that understanding inform me. And I find that what comes out of it might be positive, but it might just be empathetic or connected. I mean, I don't know if positive is always the right response. Sometimes other responses like vulnerability and empathy are just as impactful, if not more so, as positivity. And there's nothing worse than false positivity. Let's go team. I mean, how many of you have mocked people who did that when it wasn't sincere? Now, if it's really sincere, it has an impact. So let it come from you as sincere, and then it will have the impact that you want.
Even there's authenticity and vulnerability, I think.
Right? Right? I mean, we're all different in what comes up for us. Right. And I would trust that, especially if you're getting the feeling of that insightful place for you. Trust what comes from that. Trust it more than someone telling you, get out there and be high energy. I mean, yeah, sure. Don't come on a webinar and mumble and, buck it up. But, sometimes it's not what we think. Sometimes these things, these platitudes like be positive and be high energy aren't all they're cut out to be and don't have the impact we think. We need to keep an eye on that. If that's what's needed, then that's what will come up for you.
Another question here. Can you speak or provide examples for processes that was mentioned with regards to the agreement piece of CHAPS?
A process of an agreement?
It says provide an example for processes that was mentioned with regards to the agreement piece.
Yeah. So in agreement, so let's take the example of changing the way things work. Often when you're changing a process, am I okay on time? Yeah, often when you're changing a process, different teams will relate to that process change in different ways. So you'll have a team that, for example, they provide a document or an input to another team, and that process is changing. So they're not going to provide that input, someone else is, or it's going to move further up in the process. Well, sometimes just the team that's most affected, like the team that has the input that's going to provide, and now it's been taken from them and putting elsewhere, everyone puts their attention on that, and they forget their receivers. And they've never sat down and said, everybody in this process, how are we going to handshake on this? And how is this going to look? So the way I would do that specifically is I would get it visually for them. This is exactly what it looks like. And then ask each of them, literally, does this work? Okay. What do we need to get sign off from people under you? And what kind of intake do we need from them? If you have a very, very large team, then you're maybe polling or doing a survey and making sure that the decision you're taking for that handshake is well backed up. So, I mean, that's what I would suggest. I would model it out and say, here it is, and get the sign-offs. In a one-to-one, you just want to get it repeated back to you or repeated back by email.
Another question, when trying to create impacts or change as a manager or leader, how much do you change the way you're positioning that change based on the personalities of your team?
So I think that has to do with messaging and how being sensitive to people. And I have to confess that when I became a manager and I went through training that had to do with, understanding who people are, we did this exercise where you had like an animal that represented you, and everybody had that animal on their desk. I have to admit, I could not remember what those things stood for. I mean, I did the 4-day training, the notebook was on my desk. I mean, it just didn't land for me. So early on in my career, I didn't pay attention so much to our differences as to our common humanity, and really kind of doing intake with people. So really getting a feel for them. I'm a very one-to-one type of manager. So I think if you've got the tools and you really understand, like if you've done the Enneagram or you've done something useful that's given you insight about the way people best receive information, by all means. And I know people who use it really effectively. I personally just couldn't what happened was I just had a lot of stuff in my head about who people are instead of being with the person and who they actually are. And so it was less helpful for me than it is for some other people. I think you have to know yourself a little bit. If that feels helpful, then by all means be guided by what you know about them and what messaging will be appropriate. And if that feels like it's something like I'm trying to remember, if they are a type 5 Enneagram and what kind of messaging works, I would rather have a connected conversation than spend my time doing that. I'm not disparaging the Enneagram, please. It's a very powerful tool, and I know people who use it to great effect.
How can disagreement solutions be related to social work or being socially responsible?
I don't know if I understand the question. How could you resolve something? Is there a way to clarify that question at all?
Well, I'll see if she chimes in.
Let's do another one and then see
Yeah.
if you can clarify that. So.
I've been in a few courses using AdCar for change, also from Prosky. Do you have any experience or opinions on using this system to support change?
Yes. It's excellent. The reason I like AdCar is because you can use AdCar so flexibly. AdCar, for those who don't know, is a system that has a kind of things to pay attention along the change process. So whether people are aware, whether they have a desire for change, whether they have the knowledge they need to change, whether they know how to take the action, and then how to reinforce it. So it's got more steps in it than what I talked about, which was really, my model is just descriptive. ADKAR you can actually use if you had a change initiative that went wrong, or you've got one in flight. You could say, okay, where are we? Are people aware? What often happens is we skip stages in ADKAR. So we're at action, but we never went through, you know, awareness, creating desire, and then creating the knowledge. And so it's helpful. It kind of sheds light on how well your change initiative is built, and what you might need to pay attention to if you were going to fix something that wasn't working, or change your approach. So I use it for analysis. I use it for planning. Like it's very good to show management. This is where we are in ADKAR. We're here, and this is why we're heading here. And this is why we can't, and kind of to the previous question, go fast and get it done. Well, one reason that can be difficult is because it means skipping the ADKAR stages. So if it's about adopting something in-house and getting people to be engaged and repeatedly use this new process, you don't really want to skip things. You'll get a broken process. You may not have to spend all of this huge amount of time, but it's good to know where you're focused and what you missed.
So just a clarification from that one question, suggesting if there were disagreements, for example, if it's a social issue rather than a business goal.
Oh, okay, so like we personally are disagreeing about a social issue. Can't think of a single one right now where that could be the case, right?
Right.
I think this goes to disagreements in general. You know, what's our approach to disagreement? In a business context, disagreement, I've been trying to deal with disagreement in relation to like a change that we're pushing through in the business. Now you're asking a question that's more about how do I deal with personal disagreements in life, whether that's social or whether you need to do the dishes every day or not. It just seemed, you know, we have different points of view, and it kind of goes to my point about every human has this capacity for insight. The corollary to that is every human views the world from the inside out. And so we often don't meet in the outside world because we already have conceived what that world is. And so we have conversations where my inside world projected out here meets your inside world projected out here, and they clash. And that's because this is the way I see it and it's the way you see it. I usually start with enormous respect for the fact that people formulate their own opinions on the inside. And those opinions are showing themselves on the outside. They show up in actions, they show up in ungrounded, you know, disagreeable, right up to violent actions. But that everyone's actions from a human perspective are always based on how they see things within themselves. And if you just deal with them in terms of ideological systems bashing or my ideas versus your ideas, I mean, if you've ever tried to convince your partner to do something or your children to do something that they didn't see the need for, you know how difficult it is. Now extrapolate that up to social. You know, it's hard to resolve it where our ideologies are clashing. It's almost as if we need to sink back and see something differently from the inside, and then meet each other with the understanding that we don't see things the same way. That's not to say that some things are not right or wrong. I'm just talking about our human function. I don't mean to imply that everything is neutral morally or socially. I think we have social norms we've agreed and ways of treating each other that are loving and respectful. And so, you know, the more we see of our humanity, the more I hope our behaviors are loving, respectful, and seeing each other as humans as the ultimate equalizer has nothing to do with anything else. And seeing the way that we function as all the same would help all of us right now.
Great. Thank you for that message, Elise, and thank you for an amazing presentation. And thank you everyone for attending. We have a lot of thankfulness and saying it's a great presentation and a lot of great insights and takeaways. So Elise, thank you. And thanks to all of our instructors who, you know, are like you, who give their time and insights to these important topics. So thanks again. Just some
Thank you.
remarks. So we have the Leadership Management webinar series continues. So if you like this particular webinar, there are more to come. The next one is coming up in 2 weeks, which is resolving conflict. Then we have leadership disrupted, emotional intelligence, and building leadership during stress, your leadership report. So we also have others that will be joining this lineup soon, including one in process improvement, and unconscious bias is coming up. So please continue to go to extension.ucsd.edu/level up for more information about those upcoming webinars. I apologize for my technical difficulties, but thank you for hanging in there. And thanks again to Elise. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay well, be kind. And if anything else comes up and you'd like to reach out to me directly, again, I'm Shannon McDonald, and you can reach me at that email right there on your screen. Thanks again, everybody. Have a lovely day.
Thank you for taking time out from your day. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.